Hey everyone, welcome back to Raven's Library. Get ready because today's story is absolutely wild. But before we unleash the wolves and dive into the Blackwood Forest, I need to do a quick territory check. We are building a massive family here, and I want to know where my wolves are stationed around the globe. So do me a huge favor right now. Head down to the comments section and let me know exactly where you are listening from. Drop your city or your country's flag emoji. Let's see which place has the strongest pack presence today. All right, did you drop your comment? Awesome. Now grab your snacks and get comfortable, because the royal hunt is about to begin. There are 3 rules for surviving the Blood Moon Gala as a human server. 1. Wear odorless deodorant so you don't smell like fear. 2. Never make eye contact with a shifter when they're eating. And 3. Under no circumstances, even if your life depends on it, do you treat the Lycan King like a golden retriever? Mira broke all 3 in under 5 seconds. It started with a spilled drink, escalated to a 10-foot wolf rampaging through a buffet table, and ended with the single most regrettable reflex in supernatural history. She didn't run. She didn't scream. She threw a seasoned tomahawk rib bone at the most dangerous apex predator on the continent. And when it hit him in the snout, the world didn't end. The king just smirked. Chapter 1. The tray of champagne flutes trembling in Mira's hands wasn't just a serving hazard. It was a seismograph for her terror. The Blood Moon Gala was a sensory nightmare of clinking crystal, heavy velvet, and the overwhelming musk and spice scent of 300 apex predators stuffed into tuxedos. To the shifters, the ballroom smelled like power and prestige. To Mira, it smelled like a butcher shop with a very expensive dress code. "Steady, girl," the head of catering hissed, shoving a fresh platter of hors d'oeuvres into her free hand. "You drop that, and I'm taking it out of your tips. And by tips, I mean your kidney." "Got it. No dropping. Keep the kidneys," Mira muttered, weaving through the crowd. She kept her eyes glued to the polished marble floor, navigating by the shine of patent leather shoes. She was invisible. She had to be. If she finished this shift without incident, the envelope of cash waiting in her locker would be just enough to keep Leo the loan shark from breaking her thumbs tomorrow morning. She was doing fine, really. She had successfully dodged a prowling beta from the southern pack and ignored the way a female shifter had sniffed her hair with unsettling hunger. But the energy in the room shifted the moment the double doors at the top of the grand staircase groaned open. The music didn't stop, but the conversation died instantly. It was as if someone had sucked all the oxygen out of the ballroom. Mira risked a glance upward and immediately regretted it. King Kalen Blackwood stood on the landing. He was less of a man and more of a natural disaster wrapped in Armani. He was tall enough to make the railing look like a toy, with shoulders that spanned the width of a doorway and eyes the color of a stormy sea, cold, bored, and lethal. He descended the stairs with a languid grace that screamed predator, ignoring the bowing heads of the alphas who ruled entire cities. He looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. Specifically, he looked like he wanted to tear the throat out of the first person who bored him. Mira scurried toward the buffet tables, trying to blend in with a towering ice sculpture of a wolf. She just needed to refill the shrimp cocktail and stay out of the blast radius. But fate, it seemed, had a cruel sense of humor. A red-faced diplomat, clearly 3 whiskeys deep and lacking a survival instinct, stumbled into the king's path near the dessert station. "Your Majesty," the diplomat slurred, swaying dangerously. "About the territory dispute on the border, I demand a renegotiation." The room went so quiet you could hear the ice sculpture melting. Kalen stopped. He didn't speak. He just tilted his head, a slow, predatory movement that made the hair on Mira's arms stand up. "You demand?" Kalen's voice was a low rumble, like tectonic plates shifting before an earthquake. I insist." The diplomat gestured wildly, his hand clipping a passing server. The server yelped, the tray went flying, and a full glass of red wine, dark as arterial blood, splashed directly onto the pristine white shirt of the Lycan King. Chapter 2. For a heartbeat, time ceased to exist. The red stain bloomed across Kalen's chest like a gunshot wound, but the violence that followed was far more visceral. The king didn't wipe it off. He didn't scold the server. He simply let out a sound that wasn't human, a guttural, vibrating growl that rattled the silverware on the tables. The diplomat turned pale. "Your Majesty, rip." The sound of expensive fabric tearing echoed like a gunshot. Kalen's tuxedo jacket split down the back as his shoulders expanded, bones cracking and rearranging with sickening speed. This wasn't a slow, cinematic transformation. This was an explosion of fur and violence. The man vanished, and in his place, a massive, midnight black wolf the size of a minivan erupted onto the polished floor. Screams tore through the air. Guests scrambled back, knocking over tables and chairs. The diplomat fell on his rear, scuttling backward like a crab as the massive beast loomed over him, jaws parting to reveal teeth the size of steak knives. Saliva dripped onto the marble, sizzling with rage. Mira was frozen behind the buffet table, clutching a silver platter. Her brain had short-circuited. Fight or flight had failed. Her system had defaulted to confused possum. The wolf snarled, snapping at the air, his rage blinding him. He was thrashing, his massive tail sweeping a chocolate fountain onto the floor. He was inches away from the diplomat's throat. In that moment of pure chaos, Mira's gaze landed on the carving station next to her. A roast beef, a very large, very heavy, bone-in rib roast. She didn't think. She didn't plan. Her arm moved on pure idiotic instinct, the same instinct that made her throw a frisbee for her neighbor's golden retriever. She grabbed the massive, grease-slicked rib bone, hefted it like a javelin, and yelled, "Hey!" The giant wolf's head snapped toward her, his golden eyes locked onto hers. "No! Bad dog!" she shrieked, and she hurled the bone with everything she had. It spiraled through the air, spraying droplets of au jus, and thwack. It hit the Lycan King square on the nose. The silence that followed was heavier than lead. The diplomat stopped whimpering. The guests stopped screaming. Even the music seemed to strangle itself. The bone clattered to the floor, spinning noisily before coming to a rest at the king's massive paws. Mira stood there, her hand still extended, realizing with dawning horror that she had just assaulted a monarch with a piece of livestock. "Oh God," she thought, "I'm going to die. My tombstone will read, 'Here lies Mira. She died by rib roast.'" The giant wolf stared at the bone. Then he stared at Mira. The rage in his eyes flickered, replaced by something baffled. Slowly, the fur receded. Bones snapped back into place. The snout shortened. Within seconds, Kalen was human again, naked from the waist up, shreds of his shirt hanging off his hips, with a smear of beef grease on the bridge of his aristocratic nose. He reached up, wiped the grease away with his thumb, and looked at it. Then he looked at Mira. A slow, terrifying smirk curled the corner of his mouth. He didn't look angry. He looked entertained. "Fetch me, pet," he whispered, his voice carrying through the silent room. Before Mira could process the command, 2 royal guards materialized on either side of her, seizing her arms. Chapter 3. Being arrested by super soldiers was surprisingly efficient. Mira didn't even have time to explain that it was a reflex before she was marched out of the ballroom, down a labyrinth of velvet corridors, and shoved through a set of double mahogany doors. She stumbled into the center of a room that was larger than her entire apartment building. It smelled of leather, old books, and that same storm and spice scent that clung to the king. The royal chambers. "Stay," one of the guards grunted, closing the door and locking it with a heavy thud. "Stay?" Mira whispered hysterically to the empty room. "What is with the dog commands? I am a person. I pay taxes. I have a library card." She spun around, looking for a weapon, but the only things in reach were priceless vases and heavy books. She was contemplating whether a first edition of War and Peace could stop a werewolf when the bathroom door opened. Kalen walked out. He had changed into loose black trousers, but his chest was still bare, still damp from being cleaned. The sheer amount of muscle on the man was offensive. It wasn't just gym muscle. It was functional, predatory power that shifted like coiled snakes beneath his skin. He stopped, leaning against a heavy oak desk, and crossed his arms. "So," he said, his voice smooth and dark, like velvet over gravel. "You're the one who thinks I need obedience training." Mira swallowed hard, her back hitting the door. "Your Majesty, listen, it was an accident, my brain. It misfired. I saw a dog, a wolf, and I panicked. I can pay for the dry cleaning, or the therapy, whatever you need." Kalen pushed off the desk and stalked toward her. He moved silently, his bare feet making no sound on the rug. He stopped inches from her, close enough that she had to crane her neck to look up at him. He inhaled deeply, his nostrils flaring slightly. A flicker of confusion crossed his face. He smelled something on her, something sweet and familiar. But he shook it off. "You have spirit, little mouse," he murmured, looking down at her like a cat examining a particularly interesting bug. "Most people wet themselves when I shift. You threw a garnish at me." "It was the main course, actually," Mira squeaked. Kalen chuckled, a low, rumbling sound that vibrated in her chest. "Indeed. You insulted the crown, disrupted a diplomatic event, and struck a king. The punishment for any one of those is usually death." Mira's knees went weak. "Usually?" "Usually." Kalen leaned in, his lips brushing her ear. "But I haven't been that entertained in a century, so I'm going to offer you a deal." He pulled back, his eyes dancing with a cruel, playful light. "The hunt. I give you a head start. You run. If you can survive in my forest for 3 days without being caught, I wipe your debt, I forgive the insult, and you go free with a hefty severance package. And if you catch me," Mira whispered, dread pooling in her stomach. Kalen smiled, showing too many teeth. "Then I keep you, and you really will be my pet." He walked over to the massive glass doors leading to the balcony and threw them open. The cold night air rushed in, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. "Run, Mira," he said, not looking back. "You have 1 hour." Chapter 4. Mira hit the tree line sprinting, her lungs burning and her legs screaming in protest. The first thing she had done was kick off her high heels, leaving them on the manicured lawn of the palace. $400 gone. If she survived this, she was going back for them. The Blackwood Forest wasn't a normal woods. It was ancient. The trees so thick they blocked out the moonlight, their roots twisting like gnarled fingers across the mossy floor. It was silent. Too silent. No crickets. No owls. Just the sound of her own ragged breathing and the damp squelch of mud between her toes. She tore the skirt of her gala dress up to her thighs, tying the shredded silk in a knot to free her legs. Stupid, she berated herself, vaulting over a fallen log. Stupid, stupid, stupid. Why didn't I just faint like a normal person? She checked the cheap digital watch on her wrist. 58 minutes. She wasn't a shifter. She didn't have super speed or night vision. But Mira had grown up in the bad part of town, hiding from debt collectors and angry landlords. She knew how to disappear. She found a creek and waded into the freezing water, wading upstream for half a mile to mask her scent. The water numbed her feet to blocks of ice, but she didn't stop until she found a massive oak tree with a hollowed-out trunk near the bank. She squeezed inside the hollow, pulling dead leaves and mud over the opening. It smelled of rot and damp earth, but it was hidden. She curled into a tight ball, shivering uncontrollably, pressing her hand over her mouth to muffle her breathing. "He's just trying to scare me," she told herself. "He's a king. He has paperwork to do. He's not actually going to come out here and chase a waitress." Her watch beeped. 1 hour. For a second, there was nothing, just the wind in the trees. Mira let out a shaky breath, her shoulders sagging. "See?" she whispered. "He's bluffing." Then the earth shook. A howl tore through the night, a sound so deep, so primal that it vibrated in the marrow of her bones. It wasn't the howl of a dog at the moon. It was the roar of a monster announcing that the game had begun. It came from the direction of the palace, but it sounded terrifyingly close. And then she heard it. The snap of a twig, the heavy, rhythmic thud of paws hitting the earth, moving with impossible speed. He wasn't bluffing. The king was coming, and he was fast. Chapter 5. The forest exploded into a kaleidoscope of grayscale and scent. To the human eye, the blackwood was a wall of darkness. But to Kalen, or rather, to the beast currently wearing his skin, it was a neon map of biological data. He didn't run. He flowed. His massive paws, the size of dinner plates, hit the mulch with zero sound, absorbing the impact like shocks on a rally car. Shadow, the wolf consciousness sharing his headspace, was practically vibrating with glee. For the last decade, their life had been endless meetings, tax disputes, and terrified betas presenting their necks. But this was fun. She went to the water, Shadow projected, the thought arriving as a pulse of instinct rather than words. Smart little prey. Spicy prey. Kalen snorted, a puff of steam venting from his snout into the chilly night air. The girl, Mira, smelled like ozone, cheap hairspray, and underneath it all, a bafflingly delicious scent of vanilla and nutmeg? She smelled like a bakery that had been struck by lightning. It was infuriating. It was intoxicating. He tracked her easily, ignoring the visual cues and following the heat signature fading from the moss. She had tried to mask her trail by wading upstream, a classic maneuver that worked on bloodhounds, but was laughably ineffective against a Lycan king. He could smell where her hand had brushed a fern 300 yards back. He found her 20 minutes later. She was shoved inside the hollow of a dying oak tree, curled into a ball so tight she looked like a pill bug. Kalen slowed, his massive obsidian form blending perfectly with the shadows. He crept closer, listening to the frantic, rabbit-fast rhythm of her heart. Thump, 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 thump. Shadow wanted to pounce. Grab her, lick her face, carry her home. "No," Kalen commanded, forcing the beast to heel. "The game has rules. If we catch her now, it's too easy. She needs to think she has a chance." He crept up to the opening of the hollow. She was asleep, or passed out from terror, her hand clutching a sharp stick like a dagger. Kalen suppressed a chuff of amusement. She was going to stab a 300-pound wolf with a twig. It was adorable. Slowly, agonizingly slowly, he extended one razor-sharp claw. He didn't touch her skin. Instead, he carved 3 deep, parallel gouges into the wood of the tree directly above her head. A calling card. "I was here. I could have taken you. I chose not to." He leaned in, inhaling a lungful of her scent. It was stronger now, making his mouth water, before turning silently. He vanished back into the tree line, leaving her to wake up to the realization that she was alive only because he was bored. Chapter 6. Sunlight hit Mira's face like a slap, waking her with a gasp. She sat up violently, cracking her head against the wood of the hollow, and swore loudly, momentarily forgetting that she was supposed to be the prey in a lethal game of tag. "Ow. Okay. Still alive," she muttered, rubbing her skull. She checked her watch. She had survived the night. A bubble of hysterical triumph rose in her throat. Maybe she was a natural at this. Maybe she was the wood whisperer. Then she looked up. The blood drained from her face so fast she felt dizzy. Directly above where her head had been resting, 3 deep claw marks slashed through the bark. They were fresh, sap still weeping from the wounds. They were perfectly spaced. And they were massive. "He found me," she whispered, the cold reality settling in her gut like a stone. "He found me, he watched me sleep, and he left." It was a power move. It was the king saying, "Fetch me, pet," all over again. Anger, hot and sudden, flushed through her fear. "You arrogant, overgrown rug," she hissed at the empty forest. She crawled out of the hollow, wiping mud from her cheek. "Fine. You want to play with your food? Prepare for indigestion." She moved deeper into the woods, abandoning the stealth approach. If he could find her anywhere, hiding was pointless. She needed to be unpredictable. She smeared fresh mud over her arms and neck, not for scent this time, but for camouflage, and picked up her pace. Around noon, the hair on the back of her neck stood up. Not the kingly, heavy presence of Kaelin, but something sharper, nastier. A low growl emanated from a thicket of thorns to her left. Mira froze. A wolf stepped out. It wasn't the midnight black monster from the gala. This one was gray, mangy, and significantly smaller, about the size of a Great Dane. A scout, probably a lackey from a rival pack trying to curry favor by interfering with the king's hunt. The wolf snarled, crouching to spring. It clearly didn't care about the live capture rule. Mira didn't have a bone this time, but she had gravity. As the wolf lunged, Mira didn't run away, she dropped flat. The wolf, expecting a fleeing target, sailed over her head. Mira kicked upward with both bare feet, catching the beast in its soft underbelly. It wasn't a lethal blow, but the momentum sent the wolf crashing awkwardly into a dense patch of brambles. While the wolf yelped, thrashing to untangle itself from the thorns, Mira scrambled up a steep, rocky embankment, grabbing a heavy branch. She didn't wait to see if it got free. She ran. She was panting, feeling a surge of adrenaline-fueled confidence, when the sky suddenly turned a bruised, unnatural purple. The temperature plummeted 20 degrees in a second. Thunder cracked, not from the clouds but seemingly from the ground up. Chapter 7. The rain didn't start. It attacked. 1 second Mira was running on dry pine needles, and the next she was standing in a vertical river. The water was freezing, hitting her skin with the force of hail. This wasn't weather, this was a mood swing. King Kaelin's mood swing, presumably. "Oh, come on!" Mira yelled over the roar of the wind, wiping blinding sheets of water from her eyes. "Is this really necessary? Just text me if you're angry." She stumbled, her bare feet slipping on the sudden mud. She grabbed a sapling to steady herself, shivering so violently her teeth clattered together. Hypothermia wasn't a distant threat, it was 5 minutes away. A hand clamped onto her shoulder. Mira shrieked, spinning around and swinging a fist blindly. Her knuckles collided with a wall of solid, warm muscle. Kaelin caught her wrist effortlessly. He wasn't in wolf form anymore. He was human, gloriously and annoyingly dry, wearing a heavy waterproof cloak that looked like it cost more than her entire life's earnings. "Easy, Tiger," he shouted over the storm. His hair was plastered to his forehead, making him look less like a king and more like a romance novel cover model who had taken a wrong turn. "You!" Mira yelled, trying to yank her wrist back. "You cheated! You turned on the sprinklers!" "I don't control the weather, Mira, though I appreciate the assumption of godhood," Kaelin retorted, pulling her closer. "This is a flash storm, and you're turning blue." "I'm fine," she chattered, her lips distinctly azure. I'm playing hard to get." "You're playing hard to keep alive," he growled. He didn't ask for permission. He swept her up into his arms, bridal style, tucking her against his chest. "Put me down. The rules say I can't kill you. They don't say I can't keep you from freezing to death so I can hunt you properly later. Consider this a timeout." He marched through the deluge, shielding her with his body. The heat radiating off him was absurd. It was like hugging a furnace. Despite her brain screaming danger, her body traitorously snuggled closer, seeking the warmth. He ducked into a small, shallow cave cut into the side of a cliff. It was dry, shielded from the wind. He set her down gently on the sandy floor, then immediately began unclasping his heavy cloak. "Whoa, buy a girl a drink first," Mira stammered, backing up against the rock wall. Kaelin rolled his eyes, a very human gesture that looked bizarre on his lethal face. "Take the cloak, you idiot, you're shaking the cave." He draped the heavy fur-lined wool around her shoulders. It swamped her, smelling overwhelmingly of cedar and that sharp, masculine spice. As he adjusted the collar, his knuckles grazed her neck. The contact was electric, not static shock, actual electricity. Mira gasped. Kaelin froze. His pupils blew wide, swallowing the gold irises. Chapter 8. The silence in the cave was heavier than the storm outside. Kalen's hand lingered near her throat, his fingers trembling slightly. The air between them crackled, thick and viscous, making it hard to breathe. Mira looked up at him. The arrogant smirk was gone. In its place was a look of profound confusion, mixed with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. "What was that?" she whispered. Kalen pulled his hand back as if he'd been burned. He turned away, pacing the small confines of the cave. The cave was barely 10 feet wide. He looked like a tiger in a shoebox. "Static," he said shortly. "Atmospheric pressure." "Right, static. That usually feels like a lightning strike to the jugular." Mira deadpanned, pulling the cloak tighter. The warmth was seeping into her bones, but the real heat was coming from the man pacing 3 feet away. "Why didn't you let the scout wolf eat me?" she asked, changing the subject before her brain did something stupid like tell him he had nice abs. Kalen stopped. He looked at her over his shoulder. "That mutt? He wasn't part of the game. He was an interloper. If anyone is going to take a bite out of you, Mira, it will be me." "Is that supposed to be comforting?" "Because it needs work." Kalen actually laughed. It was a rusty sound, but genuine. He sat down on a rock opposite her, resting his elbows on his knees. "You are inconveniently brave. Most humans would be catatonic by now. You threw a bone at me. You kicked a wolf in the ribs. You argue with a king in a cave." "I have 3 younger brothers," Mira shrugged. "Asserting dominance over unruly animals is my baseline." Kalen studied her. The predator was still there in his eyes, but the boredom was gone. He looked fascinated. "I haven't shifted in 10 years, he admitted quietly. "Not fully, not until you spilled that wine. The wolf, he likes you. He thinks you're funny." "And you?" Mira challenged, her heart hammering. "What does the king think?" Kalen shifted, the movement predatory and graceful. He leaned forward, encroaching on her space. "The king thinks you are trouble. The king thinks he should have let you run, but instead—" He reached out, tucking a wet strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was gentle, terrifyingly so. "Instead, I am sitting in a cave, waiting for the rain to stop, wishing I didn't have to let you go." He leaned in. Mira stopped breathing. His lips were inches from hers. She could feel the heat radiating off him, smell the rain and the musk. She tilted her head up, her eyelids fluttering shut. The rain stopped, instantly, as if a faucet had been turned off. Sunlight pierced through the cave entrance. Kalen stiffened. The vulnerability vanished behind a mask of ice. He stood up abruptly. The moment shattered. "The storm has passed," he said, his voice flat and cold. He turned his back to her, staring out at the dripping forest. "The timeout is over, Mira." He tossed a small canteen of water at her feet. "You have a 10-minute head start this time. I suggest you use it." Chapter 9. Mira ran until her lungs felt like they were filled with broken glass. The forest, previously a damp, misty wonderland, had turned oppressive. The humidity from the storm hung heavy in the air, but beneath the scent of wet pine and ozone there was something else, something synthetic. It smelled like pennies and bleach. She skidded to a halt near a dense thicket of ferns, her chest heaving. "Okay," she wheezed, hands on her knees. "If that's the king, he needs to change his cologne. He smells like a hospital floor." She took a step forward, and the ground beneath her gave way with a metallic clack. A rope, woven with glittering silver threads, whipped up from the leaf litter. It snagged her ankle, yanking her feet out from under her. Mira hit the dirt hard. The breath knocked out of her as the trap hoisted her upside down. She swung helplessly 5 feet in the air, the blood rushing to her head. "Seriously," she groaned, batting at the rope. "A snare trap? What is this, a cartoon?" "Got her," a rough voice rasped from the bushes. Mira froze. That wasn't Kalen. Kalen didn't skulk. He announced his presence with earth-shattering howls and sarcastic remarks. 3 men stepped out of the shadows. They weren't wolves. They were clad in tactical gear, carrying tranquilizer rifles and electrified batons. Mercenaries. And they smelled like raw meat and bad intentions. "That's the girl?" one of them asked, spitting on the ground. "She looks small. Lord Vane paid a fortune for this?" "Vane said she's the bait," the leader grunted, eyeing Mira with cold indifference. "We kill the bait, the king goes mad with bloodlust, and the council declares him unfit to rule. Easy money." Mira's stomach twisted. She wasn't being hunted for sport anymore, she was being hunted for politics. "Hey," she yelled, swinging slightly. "I don't know who Vane is, but I have $40 in my pocket and a punch card for a free frozen yogurt. If you let me down, they're yours." The leader raised his rifle, aiming directly at her chest. "Sorry, sweetheart. Strictly business." Mira squeezed her eyes shut, bracing for the bullet. She didn't have a bone to throw. She didn't have a plan. She just had a really bad view of the forest floor. Click. The trigger mechanism engaged. But before the firing pin could hit, the air pressure in the clearing dropped. The birds went silent. The wind stopped. A sound started low in the earth, a vibration that rattled Mira's teeth. It wasn't a growl. It was a purr. A deep, abyssal, vibrating purr of absolute, unadulterated violence. The mercenary leader lowered his gun, his eyes widening. "Did you hear—" He didn't finish the sentence. A black blur, moving faster than physics should allow, tore through the tree line. Chapter 10. It wasn't a fight. It was a dismantling. King Kalen hit the first mercenary with the force of a freight train. There was a sickening crunch, and the man was launched 20 feet into a tree, sliding down unconscious. The wolf was massive, a shadow made of muscle and rage, his fur bristling like iron filings. The second mercenary scrambled to aim his electric baton, but Kalen didn't even slow down. He snapped his jaws, a terrifying clack, shattering the weapon in the man's hands before backhanding him with a paw the size of a shovel. The leader, the one who had aimed at Mira, dropped his rifle and scrambled backward, his face a mask of pure terror. "It's a trap! Vane said you'd be weak. He said—" Kalen snarled, stepping over the fallen men. He didn't kill them. Death was too quick. He wanted them broken. He advanced on the leader, his golden eyes burning with a fire that promised eternal suffering. "Kalen!" Mira screamed from her hanging position. "The rope! It burns!" The silver threading in the rope was reacting to the latent magic in the air, searing into her ankle. The wolf's head snapped toward her. The murderous rage in his eyes vanished instantly, replaced by a frantic, possessive panic. He leaped, his massive jaws closing gently around the rope above her foot. With one sharp tug, he severed the trap. Mira fell. She didn't hit the ground. Kalen shifted midair, a chaotic blur of fur becoming skin, and caught her. He landed on one knee, cradling her against his bare chest, his breathing ragged and harsh. He was covered in the mercenary's blood, his hands shaking. He looked terrifying. He looked like a god of war who had just razed a city. But Mira didn't pull away. Instinct, something deep and ancient in her blood, told her that the monster was the safest place in the world. She buried her face in his neck, gripping his shoulders. "I'm okay," she gasped. "I'm okay." Kalen didn't speak. He gripped her chin, tilting her face up to force her to look at him. His pupils were blown wide, black eclipsing the gold. He scanned her face, checking for bruises, then looked down at her ankle where the silver had burned a raw red line into her skin. A low, vibrating growl started in his chest, rumbling against her own ribs. It was a sound of ownership. "Who?" he rasped, his voice sounding like it was being dragged over broken glass. He looked at the unconscious mercenaries, then back at her, his expression twisting into something feral. "Who touched you?" "They didn't," Mira whispered, her hands trembling on his chest. "You got here first. You fetched me." Kalen froze at her words. The red haze in his eyes slowly receded, leaving behind a stark, terrifying clarity. He pulled her closer, wrapping his arms around her so tightly she could barely breathe. "The game is over," he whispered into her hair. "I win." Chapter 11. Kaelin didn't let her walk. He didn't even let her feet touch the ground. He carried her through the woods for miles, moving with a tireless, predatory grace, until the trees broke away to reveal a structure that was definitely not a cabin. It was a sprawling timber and stone lodge, hidden in a valley of ferns. Smoke curled from the chimney. It looked like the kind of place where billionaires went to drink scotch and discuss world domination. Kaelin kicked the door open and carried her straight into the great room, depositing her on a leather sofa that cost more than Mira's organs combined. "Stay," he commanded, then disappeared into the kitchen. "I really wish you'd stop saying that," Mira called after him, though her voice lacked its usual bite. She leaned back, exhausted. Her ankle throbbed and her adrenaline was crashing hard. Kaelin returned with a first aid kit and a bowl of warm water. He knelt at her feet, the king of Lycans, on his knees, and began to clean the burn on her ankle. His touch was reverent, almost clinical, but his jaw was clenched so tight a muscle ticked in his cheek. "Vane," he said quietly, the name sounding like a curse. "Lord Vane. He's a member of the council. He bet against my lineage." "He sent them to kill me," Mira said, watching his hands. "They said I was bait, to make you go mad." Kaelin paused. He looked up, his eyes dark. "It almost worked. When I smelled your fear, when I smelled that silver on you." He trailed off, shaking his head. He finished bandaging her ankle and sat back on his heels, resting his hands on her knees. "Why did you say fetch me?" Mira asked softly. "Back at the party. Why that?" Kaelin looked at her, and for the first time, he looked tired. The mask of the bored, lethal king slipped. "Because everyone else just bows, Mira. Everyone offers me their neck or their loyalty or their fear. You were the first person in 100 years to offer me a challenge. I didn't want a servant. I wanted someone who would make me run." He reached up, his thumb grazing her lower lip. The air in the cabin grew thick and hot, the fire in the hearth crackling in time with Mira's racing heart. "I told you," he murmured, leaning forward until their foreheads touched. "If I caught you, I kept you." "Technically," Mira whispered, her breath hitching, "you saved me. Does that count as catching?" "I'm holding you, aren't I?" He didn't give her time to argue. He kissed her. It wasn't a gentle fairy tale kiss. It was a claiming. It was hungry and desperate, tasting of rain and danger. Mira's hands tangled in his hair, pulling him closer, the fear of the last 2 days incinerated by the heat of his skin. He pulled back just as things were threatening to ignite, his forehead resting against hers. "Sleep," he commanded hoarsely. "We go back to the palace at dawn, and then I'm going to tear Vane apart." He scooped her up again, carrying her not to the guest room but to the massive master bedroom. He laid her down, climbed in beside her fully clothed, and wrapped an arm over her waist like a seatbelt. Mira fell asleep instantly, safe in the circle of the monster's arms. Chapter 12. Morning light filtered through the heavy curtains, dust motes dancing in the air. Mira woke up alone. The bed was cold on the other side, the sheets rumpled where Kaelin had been. She sat up, stretching. Her ankle felt better. Shifter medicine, or maybe just magic. For a moment, she let herself feel the warm, fuzzy afterglow of the night before. The kiss, the protection, the way he smelled like cedar and safety. Then she remembered the mercenaries. "Coffee," she muttered, sliding out of bed. "I need coffee and a weapon." She wandered out into the main room. It was empty. Kaelin was gone, probably doing perimeter checks. On the heavy oak dining table, there was a pile of gear. The tactical vests and belts Kaelin had stripped off the mercenaries the night before. He must have brought them back for evidence. Curiosity, that fatal flaw, tugged at her. Mira walked over to the pile. It smelled of stale sweat and gun oil. She poked at a tactical vest, checking the pockets. Nothing but ammo clips and energy bars. Then she saw it. A small, crushed communication device in one of the pouches. The screen was cracked, but it blinked with a new message notification. Mira picked it up. She pressed the button. The screen flickered to life. It was a text log. Sender: Lord Vane. Target acquired? Reply: in position. Sender: remember the deal. Make it messy. The king needs to be seen losing control. Once the girl is dead, the debt is transferred to her family. We own them. Mira dropped the device. It clattered loudly on the wooden floor. Cold dread washed over her. The debt. She scrambled for the mercenary's wallet, ripping it open. Inside, tucked behind a few bills, was a folded piece of paper. It was a copy of her brother's loan agreement. But the name at the bottom wasn't Leo the Loan Shark. It was a holding company, Vane Enterprises. The room spun. It wasn't just bad luck. It wasn't just a spilled drink. She had been bought. Her debt had been purchased weeks ago by Vane. They had squeezed her finances to force her to take the high-paying gala shift. They knew she was desperate. They knew she was clumsy. They had engineered the entire thing to put a fragile, terrified human in the path of a bored, volatile king. And Kaylin. The front door opened. Mira spun around, clutching the crumpled paper to her chest. Kaylin stood in the doorway, holding a basket of berries and fresh water. He looked relaxed, almost happy. He smiled when he saw her, a genuine, soft smile that made him look breathtakingly human. "Breakfast," he said, kicking the door shut. "I thought you might be hungry." He took a step toward her, then stopped. He saw her face. He saw the paper in her hand. He saw the shattered look in her eyes. His smile vanished. He dropped the basket. The berries scattered across the floor like drops of blood. "Mira," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "What is that?" Mira took a step back, her heart shattering. "You knew," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Did you know? Did you know I was bought and paid for before I even threw the bone?" Kaylin's eyes flashed gold, confusion warring with rising panic. "What are you talking about?" "Tell me the truth," she screamed, holding up the paper. "Was this a game to you too? Or was I just the bait for a trap you already knew about?" Kaylin took a step forward, his hand reaching out. "Mira, listen to me." "Don't!" she yelled, backing into the table. "Don't you dare command me!" The air in the room grew heavy, the silence stretching between them like a loaded rubber band, ready to snap. Chapter 13. The paper crinkled in Kaylin's grip, the sound like a gunshot in the quiet cabin. He didn't shout. He didn't throw furniture. He went unnaturally, terrifyingly still. He read the document once, twice, his eyes scanning the fine print that sold Mira's life to a shell company owned by Lord Vane. When he looked up, the gold in his irises was molten, burning with a rage so potent the temperature in the room seemed to drop. "I didn't know," Kaylin said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that shook the floorboards. "I knew Vane was ambitious. I didn't know he was suicidal." Mira stood by the table, her breath hitching. "You believe me? Believe you?" Kaylin crossed the room in 2 long strides, ignoring her flinch, and framed her face in his large, calloused hands. "Mira, you threw a rib roast at a lethal predator because you panicked. You are terrible at subterfuge. If you were an assassin, I would have been dead 3 days ago from laughter." He ran his thumb over her cheekbone, his expression hardening. "You weren't the partner in this scheme. You were the weapon. He wanted me to kill you. He wanted the king to lose control and slaughter an innocent human in a blind rage. It would have triggered a vote of no confidence." "So, what do we do?" Mira asked, leaning into his touch despite herself. "Do I run again?" "No," Kaylin said, his eyes narrowing. "Running implies guilt. We are going to walk right through the front door." He stepped back, his demeanor shifting from tender lover to military commander. "The hunt is technically still active. If I return without you, I look weak. If I return with you in chains, Vane wins. But if I return with you as my prize?" Mira raised an eyebrow. "Prize? I am not a trophy, Kaylin. I am a barista with a very high credit card bill. For the next hour, you are the spoils of war, he corrected, grabbing the mercenary's cloak and wrapping it around her. We need to shock them. We need to make a statement so loud Vane won't be able to speak over it. He scooped her up into his arms, ignoring her squawk of protest. He kicked the cabin door open, striding out into the sunlight. Hold on, he commanded, and try to look conquered. You look too feisty. I can't help it, Mira grumbled, wrapping her arms around his neck as he began to run, his speed increasing until the trees blurred into green streaks. You're very annoying for a monarch. They hit the palace gates an hour later. The guards scrambled to open them, eyes widening as the king stormed through the courtyard, filthy, covered in dried blood, carrying the fugitive in his arms like she was made of precious glass. He didn't stop for the guards. He didn't stop for the gasping courtiers lining the halls. He kicked open the massive double doors of the throne room, marching down the center aisle while 300 members of the Lycan court turned to stare. He walked straight to the obsidian throne, sat down heavily, and pulled Mira onto his lap, settling her sideways across his thighs. The room went dead silent. I caught her, Kaelin announced, his voice booming off the vaulted ceiling. He looked directly at Lord Vane, who was standing near the front row, pale and sweating. And I'm keeping her. Chapter 14. The silence stretched so tight it threatened to snap. Mira sat rigid on Kaelin's lap, acutely aware that 300 superpowered wolves were staring at her muddy ankles. She tried to look regal, or at least like she belonged there, but it was hard when she was sitting on a man who was vibrating with suppressed violence. Lord Vane stepped forward. He was a sleek, oily man with graying temples and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He recovered from his shock quickly, smoothing his silk doublet. Your Majesty, Vane said, his voice dripping with faux concern. We were worried. You disappeared into the woods for days, and to bring this creature back into the sacred court? Surely you intend to finish the execution publicly? Kaelin didn't rise. He ran a hand possessively down Mira's back, his fingers tangling in her messy hair. The gesture was intimate, scandalous, and blatantly territorial. Execution? Kaelin drawled, looking at Vane with bored contempt. Why would I break my favorite toy? A ripple of whispers broke out. Mira stiffened, resisting the urge to elbow the king in the ribs. Toy? Oh, you are paying for that later. Vane's smile faltered. Sire, with respect, the law is clear. Humans are not permitted in the inner circle unless they are servants. This girl attacked you. She is a liability, a weakness. She is a debt, Kaelin corrected sharply. A debt that you purchased, Vane. Vane froze. I found the mercenaries, Kaelin continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. I found the contract. And I found the trap you set for her. You didn't want justice. You wanted a show. Kaelin stood up slowly, bringing Mira with him, keeping one arm clamped around her waist to keep her steady. He looked like a god of vengeance. You wanted to know if she was a weakness? Kaelin roared, the sound echoing like thunder. She survived the Blackwood. She survived the storm. She survived me. He turned to the court, baring his teeth. She is not a pet. She is not a servant. She is my mate. The gasp that went through the room sucked the air out of the chamber. Mate. The sacred biological bond that superseded all laws. A king could not be denied his mate. Vane looked like he had been slapped. Impossible, he sputtered. She is human. A weak, fragile, short-lived human. The bloodline cannot trigger for a mudblood. Careful, Kaelin growled, his eyes flashing gold. I demand proof, Vane shrieked, losing his composure. Bring the moonstone. If she is truly your mate, the stone will accept her. If she is just a human whore you are using to cover your incompetence, the stone will burn her to ash. Mira felt the blood drain from her face. She tugged on Kaelin's sleeve. Kaelin, she whispered frantically. I'm human. I burn easily. I wear SPF 50 in the winter. Do not let me touch a magic rock. Kaelin looked down at her. He didn't look worried. He looked curious. "You aren't just human, Mira," he whispered back. "I smelled it in the cave. Trust me." 2 guards rushed forward, carrying a pedestal topped with a jagged, glowing white crystal. The Moonstone. Chapter 15. The stone hummed. It was a low, headache-inducing sound that Mira felt in her teeth. It looked less like a mystical artifact and more like a piece of radioactive quartz. "Touch it!" Vane yelled, his face purple with rage. "Touch it and reveal the fraud!" Kaelin squeezed her hand. "Just place your palm on it. If you are my mate, it will glow gold. If you are human, nothing will happen. Vane is lying about the burning. He's just trying to scare you." "Great. No pressure," Mira muttered. She stepped away from Kaelin's protection, her legs shaking. The court leaned in, hundreds of eyes judging her. She felt small, dirty, and utterly out of place. She reached out. Her hand hovered over the jagged crystal. "Please don't explode. Please don't explode." She pressed her palm against the cold surface. For a second, nothing happened. Vane opened his mouth to gloat. Then a pulse of energy slammed into Mira's chest, knocking the wind out of her. It wasn't painful. It was familiar. It felt like the déjà vu of a dream she couldn't remember. The stone didn't glow gold. It turned a blinding, brilliant silver. The light was so intense that the courtiers shielded their eyes. It shot upward, hitting the vaulted ceiling and scattering into beams of pure moonlight, despite it being midday. The hum turned into a choir-like resonance. Kaelin stepped back, stunned. "Silver?" Vane stumbled, clutching the railing. No, that's extinct. That's the lunar bloodline. The priestesses." Mira pulled her hand back, gasping. The light faded, but her skin was glowing faintly. She looked at her hands. "Okay," she breathed. "I am definitely not a barista anymore." "She is not human," a wizened elder in the front row announced, his voice trembling. "She is lunar, the balance to the solar wolf. She is not just a mate. She is a queen by blood." The court erupted. This wasn't just a scandal. It was a religious event. Vane looked around, seeing his political capital disintegrating. He saw the awe in the guards' eyes. He saw Kaelin looking at Mira with a mixture of shock and adoration. Panic made Vane desperate, and desperation made him stupid. "She is a witch!" Vane screamed, drawing a hidden dagger from his boot, a violation of all sacred laws in the throne room. "She has bewitched the stone! She has bewitched the king! I challenge the claim!" He ripped off his coat, throwing it to the floor. "I invoke the right of blood!" Vane bellowed, pointing the blade at Kaelin. "I challenge for the crown! If I win, the witch dies." The room went deadly silent again. The right of blood could not be refused. Kaelin turned slowly to face Vane. He didn't look afraid. He looked like a man who had been waiting 10 years to punch someone in the face. "Accepted," Kaelin said softly. "Mira, hold my jacket." Chapter 16. The throne room cleared in minutes, the courtiers forming a massive circle to create an impromptu arena. The marble floor was hard and unforgiving. Kaelin stripped off his shirt, revealing a torso that was a roadmap of scars and muscle. He didn't shift into his wolf form. The right of blood was often fought in skin to allow for weapons, though Kaelin carried none. He stood relaxed, rolling his shoulders. Vane was faster than he looked. He was a shifter, too, but he stayed in human form, wielding a pair of short, curved blades made of glimmering steel. "To the death," Vane hissed, circling. "Yours specifically," Kaelin agreed. Vane lunged. The fight was a blur. Vane was technical, precise, his blades flashing like lightning. Kaelin was brute force and instinct. He dodged a slash that would have opened his throat, grabbing Vane's wrist and twisting. Vane howled, dropping one knife, but spun and slashed Kaelin's arm with the other. Blood, bright crimson, splattered onto the white marble. Mira stood at the edge of the circle, clutching Kaelin's jacket so hard her knuckles were white. Her heart was hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "He's faster," she realized with horror. "Vane is faster." Kaelin landed a heavy kick to Vane's chest, sending him sprawling. Kaelin moved in to end it, his hand raising to deliver a crushing blow. Vane reached into his belt. He didn't pull another knife. He pulled a handful of dust and threw it into Kaelin's face, wolfsbane and powdered silver. Kaelin roared, blinded, clutching his eyes. His skin hissed where the powder touched. He stumbled back, disoriented. The crowd gasped, but no one moved. The rite had no rules against dirty tricks. Vane scrambled up, picking up his fallen blade. He grinned, his teeth bloody. "The king falls," he sneered, walking toward the blinded, kneeling Kaelin. "And the witch follows." He raised the blade for the execution stroke. "Hey!" The voice cracked through the room like a whip. It wasn't a scream of terror. It was a command. It resonated with that strange silver energy that had come from the stone. Mira stepped into the circle. Her eyes were glowing faintly silver. She pointed a finger at Kaelin, who was shaking his head, trying to clear his vision. "Get up, pet!" she shouted, her voice booming with an authority that made the stained glass windows rattle. The court froze. She had just called the king a pet. Again. But something in Kaelin snapped. The command bypassed his pain, bypassed the blindness, and hit the primal part of his brain. The part that wanted to be fetched. The part that belonged to her. Kaelin's head snapped up. His eyes were streaming, but the gold cut through the red irritation. He didn't need to see. He could smell Vane. He could hear Vane's heartbeat, and he could hear his queen's order. Vane hesitated, distracted by Mira's audacity. That second was all Kaelin needed. "Don't make me throw another bone," Mira yelled, her voice breaking into a sob of desperation. Kaelin moved. He launched himself from the floor, ducking under Vane's blade. He tackled Vane to the ground, the impact cracking the marble. There was no technique this time, just teeth and rage. Kaelin didn't shift fully, but his canines extended. He ripped the blade from Vane's hand and tossed it aside. He pinned Vane by the throat, his claws digging in, drawing blood. "Yield!" Kaelin roared, saliva dripping onto Vane's terrified face. "Yield to her!" Vane looked at the monster on top of him, then at the glowing, furious woman standing over them. "I yield," Vane choked out. "I yield." Kaelin released him and slumped back, panting, wiping the silver dust from his burning eyes. He looked up at Mira, a bloody, blinding grin spreading across his face. "Good girl," he wheezed. Chapter 17. The adrenaline crash was instantaneous. One moment, the throne room was a coliseum of violence, the air thick with the scent of blood and ozone. The next, it was just a cold marble hall filled with stunned politicians and a very dirty, very injured king. Guards swarmed Lord Vane, dragging the disgraced councilman away while he spat curses about witches and bloodlines. Kaelin didn't even watch him go. He was sitting on the floor, blinking rapidly, his eyes red-rimmed and streaming tears as his body fought to flush out the wolfsbane toxin. Mira dropped to her knees beside him, ignoring the collective gasp of the court. She grabbed the hem of her ruined gala dress, which had seen more action in 3 days than most tactical gear, and began wiping the silver dust from his face. "You are an idiot," she choked out, her hands trembling. "You were blinded. You could have died." Kaelin leaned into her touch, closing his burning eyes. A grin, bloody and unrepentant, tugged at his mouth. "I heard you," he rasped. "You commanded me. Get up, pet." "I believe that's the first time anyone has given me a direct order since I was 5. "And you listened," Mira whispered, dabbing at a cut on his cheek. "I always listen to my queen," he murmured, loud enough for the nearest guards to hear. He caught her hand, kissing the palm that had glowed silver just moments ago. "The burning is fading. I'll heal." He stood up, pulling her with him. The court bowed low, lower than they ever had before. They weren't just bowing to the king's strength, they were bowing to the woman who held his leash. Hours later, after the healers had flushed Kaelin's eyes and the chaos had settled into a terrified sort of order, Kaylin found Mira on the balcony of the royal chambers. She was wearing a borrowed silk robe, looking out at the Blackwood forest. He moved silently, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. He was clean now, smelling of cedar and soap, though the bruising on his ribs would take another hour to fade completely. "You're thinking about the debt," he said, resting his chin on her head. "I'm thinking about how much therapy I'm going to need," Mira corrected, leaning back against his solid warmth. "And the debt. Vane is in the dungeon. Does that mean the bank owns me again?" "I own the bank now," Kaylin said casually. "I bought the holding company while you were in the bath. I also fired the board of directors. You are debt-free, Mira." Mira turned in his arms, her eyes wide. "You bought a bank? I'm a king. I have diverse assets." He reached into his pocket. "I also have this." He pulled out a small black velvet box. Mira's heart stuttered. She expected a ring. She expected a crown. Kaylin opened the box. Inside, resting on white satin, was a charm on a delicate platinum chain. It was a bone, a perfectly sculpted, diamond-encrusted rib bone. Mira burst out laughing, a sound that was half sob. "You didn't." "I commissioned it the moment you hit me with the roast beef," Kaylin admitted, his eyes dancing with amusement. "I knew then. I knew you were the only thing in this world I wanted to chase." He didn't kneel. He had done enough kneeling in the arena. Instead, he held the necklace up, his expression turning serious. The playfulness vanished, replaced by that terrifying, intense devotion that made him a king. "You saved my life today, Mira. You saved my soul 3 days ago. I don't want a submissive. I don't want a silent queen. I want the woman who throws bones at monsters." He clasped the chain around her neck. The cold diamonds settled against her collarbone. "I fetched you," he whispered, pressing his forehead to hers. "Now will you keep me?" Mira looked at him, this dangerous, powerful, ridiculous man who had turned the world upside down for her. She grabbed his lapels and pulled him down. "I guess I have to," she smiled against his lips. "Someone has to take you for walks." Chapter 18. The Blackwood forest was different in the summer. It wasn't menacing anymore. It was vibrant, alive with the sound of cicadas and the rustle of wind through the heavy canopy. Mira sat on a stone bench in the royal gardens, her feet propped up on a velvet stool. Her belly had grown round, the heir to the Lycan throne making its presence known with enthusiastic kicks that felt less like a baby and more like a soccer player in training. "Stop that," she murmured to her stomach, rubbing the silk of her maternity gown. "You take after your father too much. No violence until after lunch." "Did someone say violence?" Kaylin strode across the grass. He had traded his stiff formal suits for a loose linen shirt and trousers, looking less like a rigid monarch and more like a man who was thoroughly enjoying his life. He looked happier. The lines of boredom were gone from his face, replaced by a constant, watchful warmth. He sat on the bench beside her, immediately placing a large hand on her stomach. The baby kicked against his palm. Kaylin's face split into a grin that was pure, idiotic pride. "He's strong," Kaylin said. "He's going to be a menace." "She," Mira corrected. "And she is going to be a diplomat. No biting." "We'll see," Kaylin smirked. He kissed Mira's temple, lingering there. "The council meeting ended early. They were afraid to argue with me. Apparently, they're terrified you'll come in and turn them all into newts." "I'm lunar, not a witch," Mira sighed, though she enjoyed the reputation. "But let them think it. It keeps the taxes low.